Hi there. So we have the Christmas Quillow, which has been sold via a kit and also a Christmas panel on Hochanda, and it's also available on Handmade by Hayley. And I'm just doing a little video here just to show you how to put it together. Now, if you have bought the kit, you will have all the elements bar the wadding to make it, and full instructions. So I thought I'd take it through because I know that a few people have asked for that. So obviously you've got your Quillow, and the idea of a Quillow is you're making a pillow that when you actually turn it out, and I will show you on those little photos of how it all folds together, it will actually open out to become a fabulous large quilt. So it's like a kind of knee or child size quilt, and then you just fold it back up again, and then it can all go back into the pocket when you need to, and then it is something you can take on your travels with you. As I say, nice little present for somebody, nice little project, and quite easy to put together. So yeah, let's show you how. Now, if you have bought the kit, you will have what I've got here, as well as the instructions. So you'll have your panel, you'll have your threads, you will also have your fabrics already cut into strips and your backing fabric as well. And the panel is made up of a variety of different segments which you will cut into to create the different parts of your Quillow. So you've got the main panel at the front, you've got some smaller panels here, and on the other side, or if you open it out, obviously you will see all the other panels there, and you'll have some large tartan fabric that will create the backing of your kind of cushion pocket, so to speak. So first thing that we need to do is start cutting up the panel and creating the little pockets. So on the instructions, it refers to the larger panel to start with. I'm actually going to be working on the smaller panels because it's easier to show you that on camera, but it's the same procedure with the larger one as it is with the small ones. So let's get started. Okay, so you lay your panel out, and you will see from the instructions it will actually give you the dimensions that you need to cut around your window panels. So on these smaller ones, you need to cut them to 7-inch squares, and of course you need it to be central within that 7 inches. So what I tend to do first is actually cut these around the rough parameter. So just following those little lines, it's easier, I think, to cut these with a pair of scissors than it is to go straight in with a rotary cutter. And of course you might not have invested in things like rotary cutters and quilting rulers yet, so it's not a problem with you doing these. In fact, apologies if I am leaning across the shot, but I'm just going to come in at the end there, come across there, and then up the side here. And I don't actually need a lot of this around the edge there, so I'm just going to cut straight up there because I know that's going to be a raw edge. So all I've done on this piece is actually cut around the red and then the edge of the tartan at the top there, and that's what I'm going to concentrate on. So I'm just going to get rid of the rest of the panel because we don't need that for this piece. Now this needs to be 7 inches square, so you've got a couple of ways of doing that. The way I do it is I bring in my strip ruler, centralise it on my cutting mat, find the 3.5 inch point and put that halfway down the middle, and just make sure that I've got the gap either side pretty much balanced. So it's actually running down slightly off to the right hand side of that centre bar of the window on this occasion. So just make sure that it's looking pretty balanced. The red area that you've got outside of the tartan frame is pretty balanced, and then you can just come in with your rotary cutter and cut that off at 7 inches on this side and 0 on this side. That's if you've got one of these strip rulers, which are very useful. But if you haven't, you have got the alternative that you could just use a regular ruler and your rotary cutter and do it that way. There is an alternative as well if you wanted to, and that is by making yourself a little paper pattern So this is 7 inches square, so you can see that it's right on the right side, and then you could basically find the centre point of this, fold it in half, fold it in half again, find the centre point of your picture in effect, and use that as a paper pattern if you want to do it that particular way. But I'm just going to rotate this round, and again I'm going to get my rotary roller, my strip ruler, find 3.5 inches in the centre there, and again just make sure that the 7 inches on one side and the 0 on the other are equal. So you're looking at that strip there and that strip there. Make sure that you've got roughly the same either side. You will have a little bit extra, I think, when you actually come to do it. So we've got 7 there, you've got a little bit of the red showing there, and on this side over here it is pretty much going right up to the edge. So as long as you've got your 7 inches square, you will be okay. And of course use the edge that you've already cut along the side there, because if that's going to be your straight edge as well. So just make sure that you're squaring it up to 7 inches across. So this one's only taking a smidgen off that side and a little bit more off that side. But yeah, just make sure it's your 7 inches. Make sure I'm going into my, oops, I'm doing this sitting down, which is a bit of a weird angle to be doing it at. But there you go. So that will end up then with your 7-inch piece, taking off your little tiny bits there. And you'll see that when it actually comes to stitch, you've got a wider frame at the bottom there, because that's the way it was printed anyway. But basically, as long as that's 7 inches, you will be using your 1/4 of an inch all the way around, so it will all come together when you're putting your strips in place, as you will see as you go along. So then we start adding some fabric to these pieces. Okay, so I've got my small panel, and I'm now taking my 2.5 inch navy strips. And I'm not going to cut these at all, I'm just going to lay them straight onto the fabric, so lining up the end and lining up the side, and I'm going to stitch with 1/4 of an inch along these. In fact, let me go down this side here. Doesn't really matter which side you start with. I'm going to go down the right hand side of this. So yeah, start down the right hand side. I had to think for a minute then. And then all you're going to do is stitch 1/4 of an inch. I've got my 1/4 of an inch foot on. If you've got one of those, great. If you haven't, then obviously just use a marking and just your standard stitch. Just run along the edge there until you get the edge of your fabric and the edge of your square. I'm just going to secure that on the end there. And cut the threads. And then we basically just trim those threads away. Oops, there we go. Cut away the fabric. So obviously just lay it flat and cut away any excess. If you want to do it right up to the line, you can do. If not, just cut it a little bit away. Give yourself a little bit of leniency. And you'll see that will create your side piece then, which obviously we will press in a few moments. So just going to repeat it on the opposite side, press those out, and then we'll start adding it to the top and the bottom. So I've stitched the 2 side pieces in place, and I'm just going to come in again with my strip, 2.5 inch strip, line it up with the edge of the navy this time. I'm running it right the way across. Now you will notice I had a bit of an accident with regards to snipping into my fabric, but because I've got 1/4 inch seam, I'm hopeful that that will get captured in as we go. So if you do have any little mishaps, then they're usually retrievable. And you do end up, I think it's with an extra square panel of the smaller ones. So don't panic too much. Oops, let me just lift that. I've got thread caught at the back there. Somewhere along the line. Oh, caught it there. It's just glue the thread up from somewhere along the line. Must have been underneath. And then just going to stitch along that edge again, 1/4 of an inch along to the edge there, and again just lining it up. A little bit of an overhang there, but we'll trim it away from previously. Okay, again, skew threads, trim the fabric off again. Now this one I've got a nice area where I can trim this away. So again, just trim that off there. We can neaten it all up properly a little bit later on. And then you'll have your fabric along the top edge, as you can see. So again, I'm going to repeat that on the bottom and give it all a good press. So there you go. See how it's all coming together there. So yeah, I'm going to go off, stitch the other piece and then press it all. So you repeat that until you have 4 of those panels. And as I say, the instructions does refer you to the largest panel to start with, but it's exactly the same technique. Obviously just larger pieces of the blue fabric that work away around it. So the next thing is we're going to take 2 of those and we need to connect them together. But before we connect them together, we need to make the side strips. So you're going to have one of your blue blocks, you're going to have your side strips, and then another of your blue blocks. So we're going to concentrate on these centre pieces, which are really easy to do. Again, in the instructions, it mentions to you the lengths that you need to cut these pieces to. They're already cut to the right width, but you'll cut them to, I think it's about 21.5 inches, and those will be side panels. And the idea being is that when you stitch them, you're literally stitching along the edge of those together. So you stitch those together like so. I'm just going to make sure I've got them to the right length because I haven't actually measured them. So let me bring in my other piece. So yeah, make sure you measure them before you do any cutting. See, that particular piece there is a little bit too long. So if I was stitching my green straight to that one, I would find that the other part of my green wasn't then long enough. So that's the key thing. Make sure that you trim them down to exactly the right length. So for instance, just roughly doing it, but you will measure yours obviously. I would cut it to say about there. Some of your red might be in a longer piece than this. It just depends on how it came off the particular bolt at the time. So all I'm going to do is take the 2 together, like so. Then stitch again 1/4 inch down the side seam. So going along. My machine is misbehaving. Let's try again. Just go through 1/4 inch right around. And then again, just trim it along as necessary. You open that up, give it a good press, and then put the other green piece on the other side. And you can see, because I've done it that way, I've got plenty of green left over there. So it just gives you that little bit of wiggle room, really. So I'm going to stitch that in place together, like so, until you end up with your band of 3. And then what you do is you will find that they are roughly the same width as your squares. So you then take your 2 blue blocks and you stitch 1 to one end and 1 to the other. And you repeat that, so you'll have 2 identical pieces, which will end up being the top part and the bottom part. So the top strip and the bottom strip of your quilt. And you just need to do a similar sort of idea of these 3 panels to go down the long sides of your large panel that is sitting in the middle. But I'll show you that in a second. So you can see I've moved on to the large panel, which is the centre of the front of the quilt. But I've still got my 3 strips in the same way as we did the top section with the little squares and the bottom ones. So again, all you can do is put this down the left hand side and the right hand side of the larger block, and if you have any overhang, then you just trim it off at the end. Again, 1/4 inch seam, threads all through there. I'm sticking to the same thread that we've got, which is actually a navy blue thread. And then, yeah, I think I've actually got a green thread underneath, not to worry. So drop the foot down and stitch along the edge. There you go, so the side pieces are in place, so I'll do that on the other half as well, and just make sure that the edges are all neatened up. At the bottom there you can see I need to trim that off with my rotary cutter just to give it a nice smooth edge, taking it from the blue line across there, and exactly the same on the other side, so I need to stitch those in place. And what we're actually going to look at next is the top piece. So before we actually stitch the top, the middle and the bottom together, we're going to do some work on the top piece if you're wanting to do your applique work. Now, if you've bought the Qwillow kit, you will, or if you've gone for the pattern, you will have the layout for the template of the letters to spell out Happy Christmas. So if you want to, you can actually applique Happy Christmas on the kind of connective panel that you've got between your two top squares. It is optional, you don't have to, and at this stage it's up to you whether you want to do it here or whether you're wanting to quilt your layers together and then applique afterwards. I tend to do the applique first, so as I haven't got to quilt through all of the layers, and do the applique through all the layers as well, because it can get quite chunky. So you've got your template. Now what I tend to do is I photocopy this using my inkjet printer onto freezer paper, which we sell on handmadebyhayley.tv, and I use that because it makes it nice and easy for actually cutting out your letters, and I'll explain that. So move that to the side just for a minute. So you can see here I've already got some of my letters already done. So we're needing the letter A, and I've taken some of the tartan fabric, which you've got plenty of within the panel, and this is what we use to actually create our letters. Now, the nice thing about freezer paper is that when you actually iron it in place, you've got a temporary fix there, which means that you haven't got to trace around any letters or anything like that. I've already put some fusible webbing on the back of my fabric, so I can iron them in place in a few moments. And what I'm going to do is go with my freezer paper and the iron and just press over the top. You don't have to press for too long, and then you will find that the paper actually attaches to your fabric, and that means that you can come in then and cut out your letter. In fact, I should have come in with my smaller scissors, but I haven't got those to hand at the moment. So I've got a whopping great pair of scissors here, cutting out the letter A. I've actually fused this to the right side of the fabric. So that is something worth bearing in mind. Sometimes it's recommended that it goes onto the reverse of your fabric. And if that's the case, you don't have to make sure that you are mirroring those letters, because otherwise they end up back to front when it comes to the front of your project. Can't see my little scissors to hand, so to save a bit of time, what I'm going to do is going to fold that in half along that semicircle. Obviously I do suggest you do it with a smaller pair of scissors, and then just cut out that semicircle that you've got there. So that's not too bad, is it? And then that way you've created your letter A, as you can see there. I've already got enough P's. So I'm just going to gather up all my letters and then put them in place. So opening up my panel, this is where you need to find your centre point. And the way you can find your centre point is literally just take those seams either side where you've got the join with your blocks, and then just give it a little press. Make sure that they line up top and bottom. Give it a bit of a press like so. And then open it up. and that gives you a nice strong centre line, which means you can then come in with your letters. Just take the freezer paper off the back and you scratch it with a pin to separate it up, or just give it a little bit of a rub and it usually comes away. So we've got H-A-P-P-Y. And then all you do is you put them down in place, and I tend to put happy across that top seam and then Christmas along the bottom. Now on my finished quilt, I'm fortunate I've got an embroidery machine, so I actually did the letters using my embroidery machine. If you don't, then this is another way of doing it. And then all you need to do is using whatever technique you like with your applique, whether it's a satin stitch, whether it's just a free motion stitch, it's entirely up to you. But you basically put those in place and you press them. So as they stick in place, just get your iron on there, give them a good old press, and then you would go back and stitch them in place. I'm not going to go through all of that now because, as I say, that is personal preference. It's up to you. You might not even want to personalise it. So yeah, that's how you do it if you want to. So when it comes to working on the back of your quilt with your big piece of green fabric, you need to make your cushion pocket that your Quillow all folds into. So you'll follow the instructions, and again you'll use one of those smaller squares, as you can see. This time you're using the same technique with the red, but then you do another strip with the blue around the outside, and then you will cut your tartan fabric to fit the size of that square. All the dimensions will be in the pattern though, so you don't worry about that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to stitch around 3 sides of this. So we're not going to stitch around the bottom because the bottom will get caught up between the front of the quilt and the back of the quilt, so there's no need to actually stitch that. But what we are going to do is come around the outside here, and you'll notice my fabric's actually a little bit oversized, but I'm not going to worry too much about that for the purposes of demonstration. And I'm just going to do my 1/4 inch seam down the side, across the top, and then across the bottom. Turn the corner. All the wrong buttons. And then all you do is you snip the corners off with a pair of scissors, turn it inside out like so. Okay, and then give it a press, and we'll come back to this at a later stage, but this will be your pocket that you'll stitch onto the back of your quilt a little while later. Once you've created your cushion panel, you need to attach it to the backing fabric. Now you can attach it to your backing fabric at the same time as stitching it to the front of your quilt, but it can get a little bit complicated, so I would tend to do it this way. And basically what you're going to do is you're going to stitch it in place like so, and what you're actually going to do is you're going to stitch it, you'll tack it along the bottom edge, just pin it in place, make sure that you're finding the centre point of your backing fabric and the centre point of your pocket. You should really stitch it in place, but to be honest I'm not going to on this occasion, but you will. And what you're going to do is actually stitch it, so stitching down the side pieces here. And if you are going to be quilting or putting the front of your panel to the back of your panel and sewing around the edge and turning it through, you definitely need to make sure that you are doing this stage. So all I'm going to do is stitch along the edge here. So just with your standard stitch length, we're going to go down here and stitch. It's kind of like a top stitch, so just a little shy of your 1/4 inch with this one. And then just going to stitch along, and it's basically just stitching the cushion pocket to the backing fabric. Oh, it's not close to this bobbin thread. Let's pull that bobbin thread through. There it is. Thank you very much. Nobody else talked to their sewing machines. So I'm just going to stitch again, as I say that, just stitching the pocket panel to the backing, so straight along the edge there. And it's just a little top stitch just to keep it in place. As I say, you will have pinned it in place. And because you're actually going to be turning your Quillow in and out, backwards and forwards, I would always do a few little reinforced stitches. So go backwards, reverse and forwards, and just do that a few times, and it just means that you won't find that pocket will come away. And then just cut your threads, and then do exactly the same on the other side over here. So I'm just going to roll that up rather than turning it round again. As I said before, you would stitch it in place, pin it in place first, and then again we're going to go down at that raw edge, like so. Obviously I've not pressed it at this point, so mine's rolling around a little bit, but you just take a little bit more time and trouble to put yours together. That. And that will be your pocket, and what you will notice is it's a pocket that isn't secure at the bottom. Well, don't worry, when you actually come to put your front panel and your back panel together, you will capture that in, and that will mean that that is secure at the bottom as well to finish off your pocket. But we'll do that in a little while. So at this stage we now have our top panel with our corners and connecting bit stitched to our middle section, which is where you've got the largest piece, and again you stripe. Apologise for the area that I'm working. I don't have a very large area to work within at the moment, so sorry about that, but you can see you've got your stripes either side, and obviously that side as well, so that's your middle section, and then obviously that goes on to your final section at the bottom there. And all you need to do is when you do your sewing, just pay attention. So it's where you've got your connections between your cornerstones, as we call them, and your sashing at the side here. Then you basically got nice neat corners. Now what you might want to do is actually add your wadding and quilt these layers together. And I do suggest, if you are doing that, that you do just work with your quilt topper and your wadding. Don't have any backing attached to it, because that can cause problems when it comes to putting your pocket in place. Because when you're stitching at the bottom here, what you will find, this is your back piece, and if this is already attached, then you're going to end up quilting this pocket in, which it won't be a turning pocket then. So just quilt your quilt top to your wadding. You might want to do that free motion. You might want to do a little bit of kind of free motion stitching around the bare and the windows. You might want to just do stitch in the ditch and work on the lines that you've got there. That is entirely up to you. Very much a case of personal preference. With mine, what I did was I just did stitch in the ditch, upside down. Just did stitch in the ditch throughout, just to cut the pieces together. And this is the point where I was saying about your applique. If you are happy doing your applique, it depends on the wadding that you're using really. Gosh, I've got that much fabric here. Let's pull this back out. So if you're working and you're wanting to do your applique, you might be quite happy. I mean, it's not overly thick there. You could do your machine applique through both layers, and then you're actually stitching them together. If you're going to do that, then I would suggest you would do your quilting. Maybe you're stitching a ditch to attach your front quilt top to your wadding, and then go back in and do your applique on top. And that way you've got it all done. I kind of did mine afterwards, and you can see on here I've kind of done my stitch in the ditch and left out the applique bit. So it's personal preference how you want to do that. So I've got wadding all over that now, but not to worry. So once you've done that, imagine that's been done. My wadding piece here isn't actually big enough to work with this piece here, so just kind of talk it through with you. So you'll have created that. That will be all one piece because it's been quilted together, it's been stitched together. So then you come in with your backing, and this is where you've got your pocket that you've created. Now your pocket needs to sit at the bottom. In fact, I'm going to rotate this round so as you can see. And what I'll do is I'll just use that as a raw edge just to make it a little bit easier for you to follow. So imagine that is the raw edge of our quilt now. So that's all been quilted together, all beautifully ready for us to put the backing on it along with our pocket. So that's all lovely, super duper. So your backing, you've got your cushion pocket that of course you stitch to the bottom edge. So what you're going to do is right sides together, you're going to put that in place. Now if you prefer to bind your quilt, then you can do that. In that case you would put the backs of the quilts together and then do your binding edge, but just for a quick one, you put your right sides together. Obviously you're trimming everything off so you've got nice neat edges, making sure everything lines up. So all intents and purposes, you've got your big square of your front and your big square of your back, and you're going to stitch them all together. And what you're going to do is you stitch them as if you were doing something that you're going to turn inside out. So you'll stitch all four sides but leaving a turning gap. And I would suggest that you don't leave your turning gap at the bottom, which you may be tempted to do, because what you really want to do is have that as a seam where you are catching in the bottom of that pocket you created earlier. So I personally would have it down the edge of one of the sides towards the bottom, down the side, leave a gap probably of about 6 inches or so, so you've got plenty of room for you to turn your quilt inside out, and then you can obviously do a whip stitch to secure it in place. And then when you do that, you will end up with a quilt along the lines of this, which of course you've got your front attached to your back. And then for you to actually turn it into your Quillow, what you're doing is you're going to bring in a third. In fact, if I turn it around to where the pocket is, it's easier to see it. So you're going to fold in a third, which is basically to the edge of your pocket. Then you are going to overlap that third again to the edge of your pocket. So you end it with a nice long strip like so. And then you're going to bring that in by a third, well actually down to where the fold line of your pocket is there, and then fold that over like so. And then all you do is you put your hand inside the pocket, a bit like you're turning a duvet, and turn it inside out like so. Give it a bit of a wrestle, and then you'll find that your Quillow has turned into a pillow. And that's how you make a Quillow. Thank you for watching. Don't forget, if you've not got your kit already, then do go to handmadebyhayley.tv and you can get pretty much most of the elements that you need to make this up. So have fun. Merry Christmas.